This program is brought to you by Emory University.
People, and then other people who are more associated with Emory who are exploring creativity in the arts.
Yes.
Yes, thank you very much. So it's my great pleasure to introduce to you, and I'm going to do very brief introductions, Frans de Waal and Ariel. Frans, as probably many of you know, but just in case the few of you who don't, is the director of the Living Links Center and a C.H. Candler Professor of Psychology here at Emory University. He has degrees from 3 universities in Holland, and one of them being Groningen, which I've actually been to. I think you and I are probably the only 2 people in this room who've been to Groningen. In 1975, he was involved with Arnhem Zoo and this particular event that you just saw, and wrote a book called Chimpanzee Politics, which this particular piece is adapted from. In 1981, he accepted a research position in Wisconsin, in Madison, Wisconsin, at the Primate Research Center there, and he began his observation and experimental studies of reconciliation behavior in monkeys. Since 1981, he's also worked with chimpanzees at the Yerkes, here at Yerkes, and at the San Diego Zoo with bonobos. In 1991, Dr. de Waal accepted a joint position in psychology, the psychology department of Emory University, and at the Yerkes National Primate Center here in Atlanta. His current interests include food sharing, social reciprocity, and conflict resolution in primates, as well as the origins of morality and justice in human society. His most recent books discuss the evolutionary origin of human morality and the implications that we know about bonobos, models of human social evolution. His latest book is The Age of Empathy, which just came out this year. Ariel is one of the co-producing artistic directors of Out of Hand Theater. She's also an Emory alum. She graduated in 1998 with a double major in French and theater. After working for several years as a freelance theater artist, directing and acting here in Atlanta and other cities across the United States, she and a fellow Emory alum named Maya Knispel, decided to create Out of Hand Theater, a theater company with a mission to make work that involves the audience in the event of the moment, work that is physically challenging and engaging. They enlist the audience and the community in the process of making plays through free workshop performances, online dialogue, and with collaboration with other artists, scientists, schools, and theater companies across the country. One thing I did notice on both your websites is you both have a great fondness for cooking and eating. Ariel says on hers, other interests, food, food, food.
Could you repeat that this way?
Sure. They both on their websites seem to have a great fondness for cooking and eating. On Ariel's website, where it sort of says other interests, it says food, food, food. And on Frans's, there's a lovely picture of Frans with a sauté pan in a hand, and evidently, it sounds like you're a very good cook. What we're going to do today is I'm going to ask them a couple leading questions about creativity and how they think about it, and ask them to talk some. And towards the end, I will stop them from talking and allow you guys to ask some questions if you have questions. And my goal would be for this to probably wind up about 4:45. Okay? So the first question I would have for you is, I wonder if you could both talk about how you see the role of creativity in each of your disciplines. So Frans, would you start?
Okay. Well, in science there's always a need for creativity, so you need to come up with new ideas too, and then you need to find ways to test them. And so both steps are creative steps. And the bigger step is to come up with the right questions, which I usually get from watching animals. But some people get them out of books, so to speak. They read about a theory and they develop an idea and then they're going to test it. But that's not the way I operate. I actually found this play interesting in that it reversed the procedure that I usually follow, which is I watch animals and I get ideas about human behavior. And here you're watching humans, and at the end you show how it relates to animal behavior. So that's an interesting part. But creativity is very important. And then after you have the idea of what you're interested in and what sort of question you have, then the big job becomes how you test it and how you explore that. And that's, people don't always realize, I think people who are not in primatology, how much work it then takes to get the data. So it seems like if I present things, for example, it seems like there's something you could do in an afternoon. But we usually work like 2 years on a project before it. It's a bit like your performance here. You work a long time and then it's there, and it seems you could have done that in a shorter time.
I guess our process is actually, I think we're discovering that it's more and more like science than we thought it was, in that we try to start with questions and then find experiments to test those questions as well. With this piece, we're asking ourselves, based on this research, what kind of animals are people, specifically what kind of apes are people, and then what does that mean to us? What does it mean that we're apes? And the way that we develop new work is that we take questions like those and we take the research that we've been looking at, and then whoever is in charge of the development process, in this case myself, comes up with parameters, assignments, and we come into, in our case, the rehearsal hall or a workshop space rather than a laboratory, but we often call them labs, and I give that set of parameters to an ensemble of artists and give them a specific amount of time, and they go away and they have to create something and come back and perform it in half an hour or an hour based on those parameters, and then little by little those pieces get put together to make a play like the one you saw today.
What are the circumstances that inspire the most creativity in you, or what are the conditions that you need? What are the conditions you need for your best creative work?
I have no idea, but because then you would probably consciously try to recreate them or something. Because many of these ideas, they come partly from what's happening in your field, and partly from what you saw happen, partly from your own inclinations of what you want to look at, or what you're interested in. And we have a particular situation which is maybe different from yours, is that we also have opponents, of course. We have people who disagree with us. And so then you have set out to start to test a certain idea, and then someone else comes out with a paper who says that you're following the wrong idea, and then you need to make an extra effort to show that you're actually following the right idea. And so academics get into these all sorts of fights over small details sometimes. And I'm not sure that that's true in your field, that you have the feeling that you need to show somebody else that actually what you're doing is the right thing. Do you have that?
I don't think to the same degree that you do. Yeah, I think so my co-artistic director, Adam, who I think I just heard laugh, who plays lute in the show, we spend a lot of time outside of the rehearsal hall working on the development of whatever new show is in progress. And sometimes we come up with the best ideas while we're having a cocktail at the end of the day, or driving somewhere in the car. So sometimes. But
that's true for science too.
Yeah?
I think that's true. Best discussions are at the bar, and then,
another thing we have in common.
Because then people loosen up, and instead of sticking to their little doctrine that they have developed, they say, well, yeah, actually you're right. This is and they start to find some common ground often, and that's sometimes when interesting ideas happen, when people interact like that.
Yeah, I was curious about that for scientists, because I am also the designer of all of this.
Yeah. Costumes and set.
And I know. In the design process and creating theater, often you sort of sit around and say really goofy things and really goofy ideas, and out of those, like I was saying, oh, they should play The Rite of Spring. Everybody's coming out at the beginning, which is a stupid idea, but it's ways to kind of get just things rolling, and there's a lot of it's just plain goofy, and I'm just wondering how goofy do scientists ever get in that? Because a lot of
primatologists have a reputation for getting pretty wild at the party. And they sometimes say that they're going bonobo or something like that. But yeah, I think, you know, I've been at parties of modern languages or mathematicians, and it's not nearly as much fun as primatology.
But in the actual research and in the sort of thinking about what you're doing, does that factor in at all?
A certain playfulness,
Yeah,
you mean?
yes. I guess playfulness is exactly
Yeah, I think
what
so.
it
I
is.
think to some degree. And for example, take field workers. I'm not myself a field worker, but if you go to the field where a field worker has been working for a couple of years, that takes an enormous amount of endurance, and you're often lonely, and so you get a certain attachment to the animals that maybe might not be there if they lived in a normal human society, and so they start to think differently. And then they come back on land, so to speak, at conferences, and they get new ideas, and they go back into the field. And I think they come up sometimes with new ideas that no one has had before.
Mm-hmm.
Precisely because they are so 100% focused on that one thing that they're doing out there all alone.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think that, and I imagine that this is similar in science, that for us, the freedom and the playfulness and the coming up with the wild ideas in the middle of the night is best when it's paired with rigor and discipline, that you need both, and that in order for, you know, I know that in order for Out of Hand to be at our most creative, we also need to have a deadline. We need to have, you know, we know that this play had to open on November 12th, so we better be ready, and the structure of a rehearsal schedule and a rehearsal hall, and everybody has specific roles, and punctuality in the theater is incredibly important. And we all stick to a very rigid schedule while we're in rehearsal, and I think that we need that in order to be creative as well.
Yeah, that's true for science too. The discipline is very important. So anyone can come up with 10 wild ideas about primates, and people do that all the time. They walk up to me and say, my dog does the following, and they have the wildest ideas about what their dog is doing. And as a scientist, then you say, well, if that were the case, then we should do the following tests, and this would come out of it. And so we're constrained by the data that then come out of that, as opposed to, let's say, philosophy, which is not constrained by data, and has indeed 10,000 wild ideas floating around, and each philosopher is different from the other. In our field, at least, and this is true for any scientific field, is in the end you come together at what the data tell you, and so we can be as creative as we want. There is a certain discipline and a certain constraint to where we can go with that.
Cool. Can you both talk a little bit about the process of creating this piece, which I alluded to in terms of it kind of sort of started a little bit through this commission, and what your involvement in it has been or hasn't been, and then what your reaction to it has been. So, Ariel, do you want to start a little bit about sort of the history of the process?
Sure. Tim McDonough, the last artistic director of theater, Emory, brought me Dr. de Waal's book, Our Inner Ape, one of his many books, at a meeting of Atlanta artistic directors a couple of years ago, and said, do you know this guy? Have you read this book? You have to read this thing, this and Out of Hand, or you're made for this. And so we read it, and it blew our minds, and you know, we knew who he was, but we did not know nearly as much as we do now. And then Theater Emory came to us, and the Playwriting Center and the Center for Creativity and Art, and got together and said we would like to commission Out of Hand to develop a play based on this research. But it was totally open-ended. We could, at that point, we had the freedom to take whatever part of Dr. de Waal's research we wanted, and we didn't know yet. And then we also, as part of the commission, got to attend the Evolution Revolution meeting symposium last year, which was a real treat, and listen to Dr. de Waal and a number of other really interesting and mind-blowing scientists talk about evolution as it relates to their field. So we read a bunch of the books, and we narrowed it down to a set of subjects that we knew we really wanted to explore, like in how they're similar in humans and other apes, like some of the ones you saw in the play, celebrations, and reconciliations and coalitions and power struggles and sex. We knew we wanted to cover a bunch of topics, but we didn't know how those topics might all fit together. And we have our own ensemble, so we tried out some things with them, and we had a weekend workshop with students. And we still didn't know, well, what container can we put these ideas into? What would the form of the play be? And then, because of the pressure of time, the Brave New Works workshop was coming, the long development workshop we had here in February, and we went, and I was freaking out, going, I need to know, like, what's the structure of the play? And Adam one day said, well, have we thought about, I don't know exactly what he said, but it was something like, have we thought about going back to the story in the first book, in Chimpanzee Politics? And we went back and looked at it and we went, oh my God, this story actually contains all of the things that we want to explore. And it's so much better than any story that we could write, and it's true. These events actually happened. Look no further. There's the beginning of the structure of the play. And then through revisions and workshops, we added in the scientist and the grad student character and figured out how their worlds work together. But Dr. de Waal has been incredibly gracious and helpful in sending me bits of information, even unrequested, great little emails, and bringing me a copy of the film at the workshop performance, just in case I didn't have a decent one yet, which I didn't at that time. And also Matt Campbell, one of his team members, has been answering questions on a pretty much weekly basis when we go, well, but what does happen when a female chimpanzee is an estrus? Can you explain to us what that looks like better, and how do the males treat her? And he'd answer us back.
Yeah, so I like to play a lot. For me, the big fear, and the first discussion that we had when Ken was here, who's the writer now, he's not here at the moment, no?
He will be here next weekend.
Okay.
He's our playwright in residence who we developed the play with.
So my biggest fear was that it would be a bunch of humans dressed up like chimps, and I cannot see that succeed. I could see that potentially with animations, but that's not what you want to do. You want to have real human actors. And so this is really good. This is humans acting with a chimp flavor, basically. And yeah, because it's largely non-verbal, and it has all the elements of the book. And so the story itself we didn't need to do anything about, because the story was contained in the book. And actually, if you read Chimpanzee Politics, you see that Jerome, as you call him, Jeroen, is sort of allying himself with anyone that is convenient, and so all the characters in the play have taken on some aspect of characters in the book, and so I've not been involved in detail at all, because the storyline was basically given by the book.
When you watch it and there's the addition of the Shakespeare,
Yeah.
what was your reaction to that?
Well, what is it? Where is the head of the head of that has the crown? Yeah, that kind of things. And actually, I've said that kind of things in my books. There are Shakespearean expressions that apply to primates, I think. But in general, of course, the primates do everything without verbal expression, and so you have to figure out. And that's a nice thing of this play, is that it forces the audience to watch carefully, because there's not enough, let's say, verbal scaffolding for them to understand what is going on. They have to watch what the actors do. Normally, in a normal play, you listen to them, and you can basically close your eyes and you can still figure out what is going on. And that's not going to happen here. So you have to watch and follow it, and then you get the two scientists up there, who are not modeled after me, I should say. You get the two scientists who then sort of explain and add a little bit of substance that helps the audience. And then at the end you get the movie that makes the connections even more explicit.
You guys brought this up a little bit earlier about some of the similarities and differences in process in terms of science, what you do in a lab and what you do in creating art, in this particular instance in creating theater. I wonder whether or not, I'm curious to see, having worked on this, a little bit with Frans, and certainly in the conversations, what other things you see might be similar or dissimilar. You know, where are things alike and where are things different?
What are you saying? It got a little complicated.
I'm sorry. Just I'm curious about what they see are the similarities and the differences in process. I mean, in theater we often talk about going into rehearsal halls, in a sense going into the laboratory to work. Now, obviously there are similarities, but there are differences as well. And I'm sort of leading into another question. So I'd just like you to talk a little bit about that, and then I'll...
Well, one of the differences is the symbolism, that, and we humans have such a tendency to have symbolism. So the guy who has the jacket and puts the jacket on, that's something that we understand very easily. I don't think chimpanzees understand that sort of thing very easily. But chimpanzees, of course, the alpha male in the chimpanzee group has his hair always slightly up, and so has a sort of jacket on. And from a distance, it looks like that he's different and he's bigger than the rest, which he isn't. But he's just faking that, and that's what we humans do when we have epaulettes and all of this. We're faking size, basically. So we humans have a very strong tendency to turn these things into symbols, and you did that also with the apples, the handing out of apples to this one and not that one and stuff like that, which is not what chimpanzees necessarily do, at least not with a system like that. And so there's the play has these typically human elements added to it, to make it easier actually for people to understand this thing, because that's the way we look at things.
And in trying to translate the story for humans, because we, like Dr. de Waal, definitely did not want to put people in chimpanzee outfits and have them, you know, jump around and pretend to be apes, because the premise we started with was people are apes, therefore they don't have to play at being apes. We just want to reveal the human ape to you. We constantly now see everybody as apes, and I look out at you guys. The more we got into this, the more I look around and I see ape interactions and see this research everywhere I go and everyone I talk to, which is really weird.
I'm used to it.
Yeah.
One of the things I think we're exploring with commissioning artists to be involved with the Evolution Revolution Symposium, and there were several of them. There was a visual artist, 3 playwrights, and
a dancer,
and
right?
2 dancers, 2 choreographers, was this interest in exploring kind of what I've learned this term this year, and I may not totally be using it correctly. Kind of emergent behavior comes out of putting, a scientist and an artist together to think or talk about a singular idea. And I'm wondering if you can talk some about how, while you haven't collaborated in a sense on this in terms of the 2 of you came up with this idea, but how you think something like that might. Does this make you interested in doing a different kind of collaboration, or think about working with artists in a way maybe you hadn't ever thought of in the past, and what that might be like? And similarly for you, how has this changed how you're thinking about what you're doing as an artist? So, Frans?
Well, I've never thought about working with artists on this. I've never, in the wildest dreams, thought that what I saw among the chimpanzees would one day be performed at Emory on the stage. So, no, I've never thought about that. And the only contact with art that I have myself is that I like to photograph, and that's a sort of a visual thing. But this is very interesting to me, because it is a way of getting the message across, which is a message that I try to get across, is that there's a very substantial connection between human behavior and ape behavior. And this is a very playful, creative way to get that message across. And so it amplifies. I don't look at it as, because yesterday after the premiere, some people asked me if I was upset by how maybe science was abused here. Because of course it's not a correct depiction of what happens among chimpanzees, it's a sort of approximation of what happens among them. But I'm not upset by that at all, and I think it actually amplifies that message that you can compare the 2. And hopefully, after seeing something like this and after seeing the video clip, people will pay closer attention to the similarities and the differences as far as they exist.
For us, at Out of Hand, we have a fairly long history at this point of working with plays about science or working with scientists developing new work related to science. We've been doing a series of staged readings of published plays about science for the past 8 years. And then our own ensemble-generated work has been increasingly influenced by science. And for us, this is the exciting new direction, and this is really all we want to do now is work on and try to figure out how science and art can meet each other and create new forms, and how they can be influenced by and influence each other, and what new can come out of the boundary between those two sometimes vastly different areas. And it's so interesting. I mean, the other thing is, like, science seems to be where the most exciting thought in the world is happening right now. So to get to hang out with these people and talk to them and spend your time reading this kind of research is, like, vastly interesting. And what scientists have been saying to us recently is that they actually feel there's a need for this, that they, well, unlike Dr. de Waal, who is, of course, an amazing public speaker and a best-selling author, many scientists seem to have the idea that they're not trained to communicate with the public about their research. They're trained to do their research, and they wish there were people out there who could help them communicate to a wider non-scientific audience. So that's what's been happening lately, is that scientists have been approaching us, I think partly because of this project, and saying, hey, could I, are you available? Could I commission you to make something? Or what are the possibilities for collaborations in the future? So I hope that this is a new direction in Out of Hand, although it's a development of the past, and that I could see myself doing this for the rest of my life, and quite happily.
So, I mean, and I guess that's one of the things I'm curious about, because obviously, in a sense, what the science can give you is raw material, and then access to people who are really thinking about this raw material, and that then in interpreting the raw material, you're then sort of disseminating the ideas and making them, in a sense, more narrativizing them, or giving them metaphor that then an audience or a viewer or participant could understand in a different way than they might understand the scientific literature. I'm curious from the other side if there's anything that you could imagine taking in from the artist in how you then think about your work or approach your work, or...
You mean that would affect my science, or?
Well, or ways of looking at it, or I don't know. I mean, this is the question I have is what is the reciprocity, in a sense, of the relationship, or is it? Because I would like to think it's not just that's material and then explanation, but there is something that the scientist is also taking away from it and going, oh. Not that it's going to change how you research necessarily, but how you think about how approaching. I don't know the answer to this. I'm just curious.
How can art help you?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I understand, but I think the way it helps me is get that message across, which what we talked about, is that there's a connection between human and ape behavior. I'm not sure that seeing this play will make me look differently at what I see in my primates, because I'm making that comparison all the time. Inevitably, I'm doing that. But it is a very important part of a play like this. For example, if you look at the general public perception of chimpanzees, is as cute little animals that you can hold up, and Hollywood has promoted that idea, and of course recently this country was disabused of the idea by the chimp attack in Connecticut, which has become a big drama. But for anyone who works with chimps, this was bound to happen one day. If you keep an adult male chimpanzee in your home, an animal that is as dangerous as a tiger, something is going to happen to you. And so, but to disabuse people from the idea is that a chimp is a cute little thing that you put in diapers and hold up to you, and that's all it is. I think this play is very effective because this play shows the power relationships, the sex. I always say an adult chimp has adult human interests. It's not a playful creature. It's interested in power and sex. That's what they're interested in. And actually the chimp attack in Connecticut was probably related to power and sex. That's very likely. And so these things happen, and I think people need to get a different picture of the animals. And so then you get, partly they get a different picture of animals, closely related to them, and partly they get a different picture of themselves. And that's, of course, that's part of your goal in the play, is that people start to look at themselves differently.
Yeah. One of the wonderful things about this project and about the other collaborations that we're exploring is that the scientists are not asking us to be the entertainment, to be like the dog and pony show. You know, and this was not a case where Yerkes did not come and say, well, you have to make this an educational play, and it has to be you know, suitable for children, and it has to tell the story exactly. We were given the freedom to create a piece of art based on this research, rather than just illustrating it. And that's what I'm really interested in, is that we can do both at the same time. We can expand the public's awareness of, in this case, chimpanzee behavior and this amazing research, while creating a new work of art that you can appreciate just as a work of art if you want to. We're not, you know, we're not like the singing, dancing chimpanzees who are telling you about chimp behavior.
Actually, it raises the issue, is this play suitable for children?
Oh. Well, there's...
Let me tell you a funny story about children. We did research at the Arnhem Zoo for years, students who wanted to research the public, not the chimps. So I had students standing among the public with a stopwatch and a check sheet. And they took notes on what the public said and how long they stayed and what they watched and what they looked at. And actually we noticed, for example, as far as body parts, the public is very obsessed by the female swellings, the genital swellings, and they're very obsessed by hands and feet, which are so similar to humans. But in the process of all this research, we found that the children were much better watchers than adults. And I think it's because adults come with preconceived notions of what a chimpanzee is. And so the adults would come in, and after a minute of watching them, they would already say, oh, I could watch them for hours, and then they would want to leave. So that's how the adults reacted. And if there was anything like serious aggression going on, like screaming and yelling and fighting and whatever, the children would be very upset and would be watching it very intently, and the adults would say, oh, they're just playing. But the children knew that they were not playing. And when the chimps were playing, the children were not obsessed by that necessarily. So the children made the distinction between play and fighting, and the adults were not doing that. And I think what happens in the adults is that they're indoctrinated that they are superior and different from the apes. And so they come in with that attitude, and everything that the apes do is like child's play for them. But the children don't look like that. Now, if you would bring children here, I didn't see any children here, but if you bring children, the sex scenes they would probably not get anyway, so because they happen outside of the
off
play.
stage.
Yeah. So they would not get that part probably, and the rest would be understandable, I think, for them.
Yeah, I think so too. And I mean, now that it's not a, you know, it's certainly not a play that we wrote for children, but there's no nudity and no, you know, bad words or anything like that, and there's probably actually nothing that parents would object to.
Considerable violence.
There is, yeah. That's true. You know,
See violence every day on the schoolyard, believe me.
That was wild. The other day when we were having our technical rehearsals, two of the friends of Theater Emory came to give lunch to the cast and crew who were working on the show, and they both brought their children with us, and their children were in here while we were teching the murder, and I was looking over there going like, oh, do you want to maybe, this is, you know, do you want to take them out? And they were like, oh no, this is fine, and the kids loved it. They just thought it was the coolest thing. They didn't like the blackout. They didn't like, they were like, why is it dark? Why is it dark? But the murder they ate up.
Well, let me open up to questions from the audience, if anybody has any questions before we... Yes?
I just want to say I enjoyed the play immensely, as I'm sure everyone else conversation warm and fuzzy, but I think there are ways in which we can compare the arts and science, and it's profitable to do so, and they actually do have a lot in common when it comes, particularly in science, to the phase of generating hypotheses. That's a creative endeavor, and of course the arts are nothing but creation. And I think they have a different. The arts have a different function. They're concerned with stimulation of our minds, of giving us a larger perspective of things, giving us pleasure, and so forth and so on. Where science is really concerned about one thing, ultimately, and that's knowledge. And all this creativity is well and good, but the scientist finally has to come up against the question of proof, of demonstration, where all of this discipline kicks in. I just want to ask one question of Professor de Waal, and that is, I couldn't quite get it from some of your books. We had this wonderful incident of the chimp suckering the bird, you know, and I don't know, I think I read that somewhere, but there must be other incidents too where you have an incident that you observe, and you're struck by it, and you photograph it, and so on. I just wonder what you do then with that in the way of, well, general knowledge. What sort of claim do you make on behalf of these, well, sort of anecdotal situations?
Well, that's a constant problem, is that there are many anecdotes around, and some scientists look down on anecdotes and some don't. You need to translate, let's say, a story like that. In the case of, this is actually based on a bonobo rescuing a bird. You need to translate a story like that into an experiment. Now, we're not going to do experiments with half-dead birds or something like that. And actually, that's a problem, is that for altruistic behavior, both in humans and in animals, we only work with low-level altruism. So, for example, the most striking case that I know of recent years was a chimpanzee juvenile who had a rope twice around its neck and was choking and was dying. And no one could step in because you cannot enter a chimpanzee compound to rescue it. But the highest ranking male lifted up the juvenile and unwrapped the rope and then put it down. So he did all the right things instead of pulling at the juvenile, which would have killed it. So that kind of stories I find fascinating, but we can never do an experiment. We're never going to do an experiment at Yerkes where we wrap ropes around the juvenile and see how long it takes that he chokes. And so the high-cost altruistic behavior, as we call it, is not experimented on with animals and is not experimented on with humans. And what we do instead, in humans we have questionnaires, and I don't trust those for one bit, but people do that. It's like, what would you do if someone is choking in a rope, you know? And people will always give the right answer, of course. So I don't trust that technique, and I'm very happy that I work with animals who are not amenable to that kind of technique. And so we do observations of low-cost altruism, and we do experiments on that, and I can explain, I don't know if I have time for this, but we do systematic experiments where we create a situation where one monkey can do a favor or one chimpanzee can do a favor to another and see if they're willing to do that. But it's a small favor usually, it's not like a rescue operation.
Like a piece of food.
Like something related to food.
Yeah.
I was struck by how much hierarchy was a point and of status and looking at relative hierarchy, and I think maybe that's why we understand it so well. It is suddenly you see it for itself. I thought, oh gee, the actors are occasionally making monkey gestures, but the whole story is, Shakespeare knew that very well. I love bringing Shakespeare in because it was about kings, it was Macbeth, it was all of those things. And
well, that's an interesting comment on the social sciences. And I'm a biologist who works in the psychology department. And I'm very used to hierarchies because everything in the animal kingdom is full of hierarchies, from frogs to humans. I mean, the pecking order is everywhere. And the pecking order was discovered in chickens for that reason. They're everywhere. So then you come into a psychology department as a biologist and you open these social psychology textbooks and you look for power and dominance, and they're not in there. The humans have no power relationships, apparently, according to these textbooks. And I think what happens in the social sciences, and this is true actually in all of academia, there's a denial of power relationships, because we like to be egalitarian. And we even confuse the study of power relationships with approval of power. Now, I've had that, is that I talk about the power in relationships in chimpanzees and in humans and compare them, and people say, so you like power? No. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about what humans or animals do. And so there is a sort of taboo, a taboo that has existed for a long time. That's why Machiavelli has a bad name. Machiavelli talked about power relationships openly. And it has a bad reputation in academia, but it's all over the place, and people should start paying attention to it. And that's also why, if you see a play like this, we easily recognize what is going on. Because as soon as you walk into a room with 20 people who know each other, within half a minute, you know approximately the power structure of that group. That's how easily we convey it and recognize it. It's all in our body language. And this play brings that out, which is very important.
Oh, I think, yeah, it's really the strength. I thought it was wonderful because of that. So.
Well, and I'm definitely one of these people who, you know, I grew up in a very liberal community, and my parents are hippies, and I was definitely raised to believe that, you know, girls are just as good as boys, and everyone is equal, and there's a premium on that. And going into this research, I went, okay, well, it's about you know, the need for hierarchy and gender differences that you just cannot erase or ignore. And I definitely had a little bit of reaction of like, oh, well, that's not true anymore. And then you read it and you start looking around and you go, yeah, actually, this is everywhere, and it doesn't matter whether or not I like it or how I feel about it. It doesn't mean I'm making a statement that I think that one gender or one type of person is better than another, but power and sex exist. So it's been a really interesting experience for the child of hippies. The child of bonobo, like parents.
Well, that could be your next play.
I don't think I've ever seen bonobos in a zoo. Is it because people are afraid their children will be shocked by?
No, the Milwaukee Zoo, the San Diego Zoo, the Jacksonville Zoo. There's bonobos at zoos, but not every zoo has them.
Other questions? Yes.
So I would say that one of the goals that scientists have, maybe the chief goal, is to try to make other people look at the world in a different way. In particular, if you can get your competitors to interpret their data in the light of your model, then that's a real victory. So my question really is for Ariel. Are you trying, would you say that that's sort of what you're trying to do, at least change?
To get my competitors to interpret their data in a different way.
Wow! Do you feel like one of your primary motivations is to change the way people look at the world, or do you feel as though that's not really what motivates you?
Yes. It's to open up the way that people look at the world, not to change it to ask them to look at the world in any one specific way, but to ask them to look at more of the world, to see it more clearly and more deeply than they did before. So yeah, so I don't have to necessarily fight with competitors, except for that. I guess we're fighting with the competitors who view theater as a means purely of entertainment, and I think that theater should be really entertaining. I hate sitting through a boring theater. You know, I think that it should be funny and compelling and shocking and wild and deeply entertaining, but not fluffy, not like entertainment first. Yeah, not just entertainment. You know, I would like to challenge people's worldviews, but not with any one particular agenda, just because the world is so fascinating and there's so much out there to see anew. and I get the job of helping to make that happen, which is just a wonderful thing to do when you go to work.
Yes.
Yes, you have sex and politics, but you left out another one, which is religion. And do we see religion here at all?
You're looking at me. I didn't see any religion. There's always speculations about animals and religion. As soon as an animal stares for half an hour at the sunset, they say it must be a spiritual experience. But you know, I'm not convinced of that. But there are books on that topic of animals and religion. But I think religion is not to be found in a chimpanzee society.
Well, celebration is thought to be a primitive.
Oh, sure. Yeah, there's all sorts of things that relate to religion. For example, the hierarchy. You know, Freud already and many others have speculated that we have modeled God after the alpha male. That our God in Christian religion is modeled after a super alpha male who has superpowers. Now, yeah, so a hierarchy, and for example, the bowing rituals that you saw in the play are present in religions. You go to the St. Peter in Rome and you see people bowing for the Pope in exactly the same way. So all of that is present in religion, and religion has adopted a lot of regular human behavior into its scheme. But religion per se is, let's say, the rituals and belief in God and all of that, I'm not sure.
Genesis. Genesis of religion is there.
Yeah, religion is a human endeavor, and so incorporates an enormous amount of human behavior and human tendencies.
I have a question for you about the arts, and also just where the arts and science intersect. The economy is changing enormously in terms of, especially for the writing community. I mean, myself, I'm a writer. I'm a science writer, actually. Oh. And you know, it's become very difficult because the outlets are shrinking dramatically, and adapting to this changing, to the changing times and this changing economy. Involves adapting to a new multimedia place, new forms that we have to, that writers have to learn how to express themselves in, you know, in terms of internet, you know, publications on paper. Everything has to be multimedia, as this creativity conversation is, and it's something that, you know, people in my line of work are not necessarily comfortable with doing, but one place where I think that artists and writers I know can always, where they can find a good meeting places with scientists, because right now science is driving the changes in society, these changes in technology. Science is driving it. It's just the momentum where everything's going. It's like, climb on board.
Yeah, well, and that's sort of
behind.
what we feel is that it is where the most interesting ideas and the most interesting work is in the world right now. So that while Out of Hand Theater could theoretically make shows about anything, you know, we could say what we really want to make shows about is football. And we do have a show about football. What we look around and we see that's the most interesting is what's happening in science, and science might be the closest thing that I personally have to religion besides art, and I think it's such a, you know, there are so many amazing things that I think so many people don't understand or can't explain that influence their daily lives that come from science and technology, and scientists are actually tackling and coming up with answers for some of the most basic questions in the world right now while we're alive, about, you know, about where we come from and how old the world is and how the universe started and how our brains work and how the universe works. That's amazing to me, I think, in a in a way that religion may have been at other times in history. And I'm not saying that science is religion or that it would replace it or anything like that, but it certainly is a fascinating world.
Well, let me add to that. There's also hostility to science. There are people who are not in favor of science. Certain, let's say, evolution. The E word has not been mentioned in the but it is right in there, of course. So there is a certain hostility in certain people who are either suspicious of scientists or thinks that that science is broaching topics that they don't want to be broached, like global warming is another issue like that. And so we've always to be careful is that there's a certain group of people in this country who like to keep things irrational in a sense and pursue agendas that are different from science. So that's a problem, and in that sense the play can also help maybe.
And I think education is key to overcoming that. I think...
well, and this play is educational.
It is. That's one place where the arts is key to helping the greater society get on board the train.
Okay, I think we have time for maybe one more question, and then the tape runs out, and I think people's patience will run out. It's a gorgeous day outside. Yes, yes.
Speaking of the E word, what in Dr. de Waal, what in your research over the years and up to date have you observed in primates? What have you observed in any changes, in any behaviors, in the things they have learned? Bring us up to date, see what these guys...
So you mean whether primates are still changing?
Yes. Are they changing? What are some of the changes? I mean, we want to know what to look forward to in Ariel's next production.
Well,
yeah, tell me.
Well, evolution goes very slowly, and so the primates that we work with, they are barely hanging on to survival. So they're not in a situation, I think, where they have a lot of room for expansion and evolution and all of this. And even if they had, we would not notice that in a couple of, let's say, 50 years. We also do studies on culture in primates, in the sense that primates, they transmit knowledge and they transmit behavior to each other. They learn it from each other. And so you get cultural differences. One chimp group is not the same as another chimp group in terms of the technology that they use to get food and things like that. But even the cultural changes, which in generally are faster, also in human society, much faster than evolutionary changes, even that is generally a slow process. And even for that, if you work for 50 years with chimpanzees in the field, as we now have done, even then you don't see a lot of change coming. And so we can create different cultural changes, and we do that sometimes at the Yerkes Primate Center. We introduce new habits in the group and see how they spread. But that's about the only changes that I can talk about.
Well, thank you all very much for joining us today.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.